Good morning to our participants. We will be giving a few more minutes for other participants to come in before we officially start the program. Thank you.
Thank you.
So good morning, everyone. The Stratbase Albert Del Rosario Institute would like to welcome you all to today's virtual town hall discussion titled The Future of Philippine Foreign Policy on Maritime Security Capability and Strategy. I'm Clarissa Canay. I'm the Program and Advocacy Manager for Stratbase, your host and moderator for this morning's event. The rising uncertainties in the global environment, especially in the Indo-Pacific region, has demanded states to reorient its foreign and security policy, to identify where and whom to collaborate, cooperate, compete, and confront with in terms of emerging threats and opportunities for development. Within the context of maritime security, the Philippines continues to be in the mix of geopolitical shifts, given the increasing influence of China, the growing importance of the region, and of course, closer to home is the territorial rights over the West Philippine Sea. Because of these, the country must strengthen its inherent capability to be a maritime power, given its strategic and geographic characteristics and location. We have today leading thought leaders and experts in the fields of international relations and national security to take us into a deep dive on this subject and provide ways forward for the country and the presumptive administration. For any questions throughout the discussion, please feel free to send these in to the Q&A function, which you can see below your screens, and we will get back to these in the open forum. Also, please be reminded that this event is live on Facebook and a recording will be made available through our social media channels and website. To formally begin the event, I would like to welcome the President of Stratbase ADRi Institute, Professor Victor Andres Manhit. He is a well-regarded strategist. He has built winning public affairs campaigns integrating message development, public relations, and the mobilization of grassroots support. He has also provided top-level strategic analysis and thought leadership in global issues in the Philippines. He will be presenting his study, which was made available in the Beyond the Crisis, a strategic agenda for the next president, titled A Responsive and Strategic Philippine Foreign Policy. So here's Professor Manhit.
Thank you, Clarice. And thank you for our speaker, Dr. Chester, Dr. Renato, Rear Admiral Romel, for joining us in this morning's virtual town hall discussion. We had so much interest from registrations. Hopefully, they can all join, and looking forward to their questions as we share our thoughts and discussions. 2 weeks back, or nearly 2 weeks back, we launched a book called Beyond the Crisis. And part of my argument in one of the chapters of that book is that there are changes in the international political economy, geopolitical shifts, rising inequality, and political instabilities that continue to complicate global risks for the Filipino nation. Side by side with this is that we see the deterioration of the old order, and we shift to a multipolar order. We have seen over the years the global political structure has shifted into a multipolar world, wherein states are economically, geopolitically, and strategically interconnected. The past 2 years, we have seen how global issues like the COVID-19 pandemic, even what we see in international news as US, China strategic competition, and the challenges of climate change have underscored the importance of multilateral cooperation in collectively managing risks and challenges. Our region's growing strategic importance has caused major players, including the United States and the European Union, to realign their own foreign policy to develop mutually beneficial relationships. And when I see the world that we are living in today, I see a network international society. And in the network international society, I see opportunities and challenges. We have seen the increase in the number of democracies since the 1950s. We have seen economic interdependence among states. We have benefited from this economic interdependence as a nation, our Filipino people also. Growth of membership in intergovernmental organizations, including both global and regional institutions. Fast-paced development of technology and innovation provide space for increased connectivity and interaction, especially during these past 2 years of the global pandemic. What does it mean for the Philippines? We have an incoming administration of President-elect Ferdinand Marcos Jr. They're expected to face domestic issues that will be left by the outgoing administration, foreign indebtedness, and the socioeconomic consequences of this ongoing global health crisis. But beyond these issues, the new administration will also face formidable geopolitical challenges from the renewed tensions in the Indo-Pacific region. We have seen how China has engaged not only countries in ASEAN, but now even Pacific nations. The Marcos Jr. presidency is expected to face complex and multifaceted challenges. That's where I would like to focus on the need for an independent and value-based Philippine foreign policy. We need to learn from the experience of past and present Philippine administrations that have attempted to implement a foreign policy that would advance the country's national interests in light of persistent security challenges. As we try to navigate the global order shaped by new security challenges that have posed uncertainties, past and present Philippine administration. From Aquino administration, from 2010 to 2016, we remember how they have filed and won the West Philippine Sea case against China in the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague. Or what we saw in September 10, 2016, when President Duterte announced an independent foreign policy, launched diplomatic initiatives, and built new alliances and bring Philippines closer to non-traditional partners, such as China and Russia. As I try to analyze these past policy initiatives from, the, from a past administration to an outgoing administration, I remember what my colleague and one of our speakers this morning, Dr. Renato de Castro, wrote in one of our special policy papers in our Beyond the Crisis, that the Duterte administration was confronted by China's failure to deliver the promised loans and direct investments to finance the Philippine government's Build, Build, Build program. An increasing naval presence and assertiveness near the artificial islands it constructed in the South China Sea. That was part of the paper of Dr. De Castro entitled A National Security Strategy for the 17th Philippine President, a case for a limited balancing. And I'm a person that believes on the power of understanding the public. And I remember one of our questions in a survey done for us by Pulse Asia, where we saw the voters at the start of the presidential campaign believing that among candidates, the incoming president, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., we call him Bongbong Marcos or BBM, will best defend the country against China. What is this from a policy point of view? The Marcos presidency and the future of Philippine foreign policy. I took note of one of the statements of our incoming president, Bongbong Marcos Jr., when he said that Philippine foreign policy should not be shaped by the interests of other states. I totally agree with the statement of incoming president. On the West Philippine Sea issue, he has no plans of giving up our country's territory to any state. And we saw how we were elated with such strong statements. His willingness to work and engage with the leadership at Beijing, of course, we need to accept the reality that this is our big neighbor within our region. But on the US-Philippine alliance, he's expected to veer away from the position of President Duterte. There was a good poll I heard in my conversation with our sitting ambassador to the United States, where we saw the commitment of our old ally, the United States, in supporting Philippine national interests. In May 26, 2022, in one of his most recent press conference, he spoke of our sovereignty is sacred and we will not compromise it in any way. We are a sovereign nation with a functioning government. We talk to China consistently with a firm voice. We have the arbitral ruling. We have the very important ruling in our favor. And we will use it to continue to assert our territorial rights. It's not a claim. It is already our territorial right. And that is what the arbitral ruling can do to help us. And it's something that I share in view. Because when people speak of claims of other countries, I always remember that after July 12, 2016, it is not a claim anymore. It's a right given to us under a rule-based international system. That's why for me, as we see a new administration by June 30, it's time to reevaluate the country's position towards China. Implement policies to further protect our national sovereignty. The new administration of President-elect Bongbong Marcos Jr. should start prioritizing multilateral and inclusive cooperation with other like-minded states. Go beyond this US-China rivalry. Especially work stronger, build partnership with states that share the desire for upholding the rule of law and preventing unilateral action that can undermine peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific. The Philippines should engage with states which share democratic values of combating corruption, addressing the rise of authoritarianism, and promoting human rights. This morning, we will hear one of our colleagues, Dr. Chester Cabalsa, in his paper, The Philippine Civil and Maritime Security, Transforming from Archipelagic to Maritime Power. We will hear the argument of Dr. Chester on the need for the Philippines' diplomatic and economic rapprochements with Beijing through bilateralism certainly missed out on the golden opportunity. I hope we can learn a lot from the paper of Dr. Chester. Beyond security issues, when you look at foreign policy, I believe on economic diplomacy. The need to strategize Philippine economic diplomacy in the new age of globalization beyond this pandemic. As we said, as we see the world move towards normalization, we need to look at this new age of globalization from a state to state or even multilateral relations, because this is an opportunity for individual states to delineate areas to compete. Let's remind ourselves that we compete not internally. After an election season, it's time to think beyond politics. Our competition is outside, but we can also cooperate and even confront within the interest of the Filipino people. We need to strengthen economic diplomacy and trade with other states. We need that foreign investment. We need to spur economic growth for the basic issue that our Filipino people continues to be challenged. And we saw this month after month of our surveys during the election period. They need jobs with better wages to help them alleviate poverty and hunger, to help them deal with the higher cost of living. And there are options for that. How do we turn agreements, opportunities outside, like the RCEP or the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement? How can we turn the initiative by the European Union or the European Global Gateway? When you look at this, which is my next slide, there are things happening outside our borders. We've been actively part of Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. You hope that when you see some of these initiatives in the region, outside the region, but being part of the region, engaging the region, the Asia-Pacific, the Indo-Pacific, ASEAN, East Asian countries. Let's just hope that we see opportunities. Just last week, we saw the leadership of the Quad, led by President Biden, speak of an Indo-Pacific economic framework. And we are part of that. They see us as part of that, as it rests on 4 pillars of trade, facilitation and digital economy, supply chains, energy, and anti-corruption. What I see is another opportunity. And we hope that the leadership of our foreign affairs, our trade and industry departments see this as an opportunity to create more investment for the Philippines that will generate jobs. From RCEP, Indo-Pacific Economic Frameworks, APEC, or the European Global Gateway. We learn from this. We are now part of this. Because at the end of the day, we all know for a fact that the realities of this interconnected world is we see that global cooperation and collective problem solving on issues needs to be promoted. On security issues, we know of the initiative of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue between Japan, Australia, the United States, and India. We hear of Quad Plus, South Korea, Vietnam. Shouldn't we look at ourselves? Maybe we can be part of that Quad Plus. Or strong friends of the Philippines, the AUKUS, the Australia, United Kingdom, and US initiatives. Last week, we saw the Quad meeting, whereby they committed to renew their commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific that is inclusive and resilient. They launched this partnership for maritime domain awareness, responding to humanitarian and natural resources and disasters, and combating illegal fishing. I remembered a statement, and I wanted to share this in my presentation. The Quad is committed to cooperation with partners in the region who share the vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific. We will champion adherence to international law, particularly as reflected in the UNCLOS, and the maintenance of freedom of navigation and overflight to meet the challenges of a maritime rule-based order. We strongly oppose any coercive, provocative, or unilateral actions that seek to change the status quo and increase tensions in the area. When I saw this statement, and I saw the continuation of the statement with this commitment or a shared commitment to the international rule-based order, cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region, consistent with what they said September 15 last year. It basically tells us that we share these values. The idea that we live in a rule-based international system. And I remember the views of our institute when we established it that, international law negates the idea that might, power of bigger countries should dominate. But maybe it makes us equal if we follow and adhere and support and advocate for international law. And that is what we got July 12, 2016. So that need for that cooperative security environment, the democratic community, and the rule of law. We have seen it being advocated. So we see really this world whereby countries that share values with us, that have a values-based approach, is crucial, is important in collectively managing foreign policy issues. We have seen that as we recall proceedings of the Summit for Democracy last year. We saw that even this year, February, with the ASEAN Foreign Ministers Retreat in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. And it always reminds me of a book published by a friend of mine, published with the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Murray Hybert, a colleague of mine that we work together in tracking issues until today in the Indo-Pacific, where he wrote about China's growing involvement in Southeast Asia prompts a blend of anticipation and uneasiness among its smaller neighbors. As Beijing mounts its drive south with an assortment of tools, Chinese toolbox is loaded with diverse instruments from soft power to hard power to sharp power. And the experience of Southeast Asia are important beyond the region itself. For other countries, they are a microcosm of China's ambitions and give signals about how the country, its companies, and its military operate when they move outside Chinese borders. Hope we can learn from such extensive research and publications. But where do I really focus on? I continue to focus on the idea of of multilateralism, some would even say minilateralism, and the future of global governance. I believe, as a student of international politics, I consider myself a student, that we need to foster multilateral and strategic partnerships, as it is imperative if the Philippines is to recover from the consequences of the outgoing administration's foreign policy decisions and align with the growing alliance advancing a free and open Indo-Pacific region. We need multilateral and strategic partnerships. As more states introduce and they align their foreign policy, countries like the Philippines, with the incoming administration of Ferdinand Marcos Jr., should use this as the opportunity to create additional channels for cooperation. The incoming government should learn and strategize through its existing alliances and partnership to advance its strategic interests and contribute to the global partnership of promoting a free and open Indo-Pacific. When you look at the Indo-Pacific, you have to look at where the Philippines is. Look at the western part of our world, the eastern part, the southern part, the northern part. And you see that statements after statements about the Indo-Pacific strategy. ASEAN's Indo-Pacific outlook as early as 2019, or the Quad Joint Leader Statement, which is the most recent one, May 24, 2020. Again, I'd like to emphasize the need to think beyond politics. Elections are over. We have a new incoming administration with a strong mandate and with the support of the Filipino people in asserting our rights, in protecting our territorial integrity. And it should come with a more responsive and strategic foreign policy initiative that should be cognizant and considerate of national interests, of economic diplomacy, of human security, alliances and strategic partnerships, learning from public sentiments. We saw how the campaign of our incoming president was built around understanding public sentiment. Again, as a student now of local politics, national politics, I see that as brilliant. I hope they bring that discipline in governance. As various challenges continue to emerge from the current international order, as I said, we need to reevaluate our foreign policy directions. Learn for the past 6 years as we hit June 30. See where our economic initiatives have brought us as we establish new alliances and strategic partnerships. But let's listen and be consistent in hearing the interests of the Filipino people. October of last year, we did a national survey with our partner institution, Social Weather Station, where we saw 82% of Filipinos believe that we should assert our rights on the islands in the West Philippine Sea, as stipulated in the 2016 decision of the Permanent Court of Arbitration. I would continue to raise this sentiment, bring it up for the incoming government to hear us. And the next president, in the eyes of the Filipino people, should even form alliances. Remember this defeatist attitude of outgoing President Duterte. We're a small country. What can we do? 85% of Filipinos across demographics. That's what we wanted to emphasize here. Look at those age groupings. Look at those geographic areas. The Filipino people is basically telling us, let's build alliances. Let's work with countries with shared values. And who do we trust? At the end of the day, we should learn and listen. We continue to have strong trust towards countries that have been our friends, from the United States of America, Japan, Australia, United Kingdom, European Union. We can grow more with India. But China has consistently been seen only trusted by 2 out of 10 Filipinos. And what can we do? Maybe we need to strengthen the military capability of the Philippines to protect and ensure our maritime rights, our integrity, our territorial integrity to be protected. When 8 out of 10 Filipinos tell us that, let's listen to them. Maybe it's time for us to revisit the initiative by then Aquino administration on the need for conducting joint maritime patrols with allied countries. We continued with military exercise, maybe to revisit joint maritime patrols. What about 8 out of 10 Filipinos, or specifically 79% telling us the importance of the Philippine government building infrastructure on vacant islands in the West Philippine Sea to further assert our rights to these islands based on the arbitral ruling. So here I speak of a more responsive, strategic, and Philippine foreign policy. I use the word responsive because you need to listen to public sentiment. You need to understand that government exists only for the Filipino people. You get elected because your slogans, your statements were heard and was chosen over other candidates. So it's time to listen to them and become more responsive. But we need to look also and be strategic. And to be strategic, we need to prioritize partnership that promote rule-based international order. It's high time that the Philippines look at the international community support and move on from a small state narrative and work its way up to become a more relevant player in the region, ASEAN, Indo-Pacific. The need to configure Philippine national interests with evolving interconnectedness and multipolarity. The need to look at economic diplomacy as the primary means of showing the contribution of both state and non-state actors in national development and international diplomacy. Let's look at our diplomatic team in different embassies. How can you champion economic initiatives in your engagement and create opportunities for investment that will create jobs? We need to look at equal consideration to various factors affecting human security. We have to go beyond traditional security challenges and include non-traditional security challenges. Climate change, the pandemic, environmental degradation, and resource scarcity. Or we have to emphasize, and I will emphasize, the continuing importance of alliances and strategic partnership in navigating this changing international order of a multipolar world, of an interconnected world. Again, I reiterate, we need a more responsive and strategic foreign policy that implement a clear, cohesive, consistent foreign policy direction and develop the country's comprehensive power according to its military, economic, scientific, and cultural capabilities. Our time is now. We can stand up and be part, an active part, and not a weak nation. We need to uphold our national sovereignty, our territorial integrity in the West Philippine Sea by fostering multilateral and inclusive cooperation through alliances and strategic partnerships. And at the end of the day, at the core of a nation's strength, we need to prioritize economic engagements and cooperation in regional and global economic initiatives. That is what I desire, that I believe is what is desired by the Filipino people based on our yearly, biannually studies on the sentiments of the Filipino people with regards to their security and foreign policy. Again, good morning and thank you for joining us. And hopefully you can get a chance to look at our publication Beyond the Crisis, a strategic agenda for the next president.
Thank you, Sir Dindo, for providing a really big overview of the external environment that we are navigating in. Moving forward to the maritime security angle, we have Dr. Chester Cobalza, President and founder of the International Development and Security Cooperation. He was formerly the Executive Fellow at the Council of Fellows and previously the Vice President for the Center of Strategic Research and Strategic Studies at the Development Academy of the Philippines. Here to discuss his study titled Philippine Civil and Maritime Security, Transforming from Archipelagic to Maritime Power. Dr. Chester.
Thank you very much, Therese, for that kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to extend my gratitude to, of course, Professor Victor Manhit and to Strat-based ADRi for inviting me. Secondly, my presentation will focus on the Philippine civil and maritime security with an aim of becoming an archipelagic to maritime power. And of course, you will see these the copy of my paper in the Beyond the Crisis book, which was launched recently. And definitely, one moment. Okay, this one. This will be the themes that I will be discussing for 15 minutes, the direction of the third horizon of our military's modernization and the shift from internal security operation to territorial defense operations, and perhaps trying to rebrand the revised AFP modernization program, which some would call its re-equipment of the AFP, which should have been done decades back. And what is the current situation of the Philippine Coast Guard modernization. And these are public investments. We use people's money here, and we should rebrand it as our country's pride. And of course, as already pronounced by Professor Manhit, we wanted to have a value-based and increase multilateralism. And of course, by doing so, we want to increase naval and Coast Guard diplomacy because these are substantial in attaining a full implementation of the independent foreign policy. Now, we know for a fact that the Filipino people have invested so much on the first and second horizon of the AFP modernization program, and we will revisit their strategies based from the major services of the armed forces and what do we expect from the third horizon of the third phase of this revised AFP modernization program. Right now, the AFP, the Army is doing this strategic base in 2028 aimed at relocating their bases to more strategic vantage points while maintaining big ticket projects on cybersecurity, which will become the next front for future warfare. And the Air Force will have to achieve the PAF Flight Plan 2028 to address aerodrome requirements and acquire multi-role fighter jets and helicopters for internal and external defense. And we know for a fact that if we shift to territorial defense operations, the Navy will become the forefront amongst these major services in the AFP, and they will have to revisit and review the offshore territorial defense force and active archipelagic defense strategy, as we had seen prominently Chinese incursions in the West Philippine Sea in the previous months and years so far. And we advise that perhaps the next administration will continue with the Visiting Forces Agreement after it was recalled last July 2021, and we had a successful balikatan with the US, which was concluded only this summer. Now, the Philippine Coast Guard, what are the recent developments there? And they are doing also modernization program while reflecting on their needs and factions given the many responsibilities that they have. Right now, we saw the PCG's multi-role response vessels, the fifth coming from Japan, and we will see a more proactive fleet policy coming from PCG. They are doing also aggressive recruitment, and we see some generalist human resources, meaning to say that they are recruiting future Coast Guard who are coming from different fields and specializations, and they are also undergoing private-public projects so far. And the dilemma that we have so far would be the scope of their functions, given that they have 5 mandates from maritime environmental protection, search and rescue, and so on. And of course, we wanted them to focus on the maritime safety and security. And one of their dilemma is the PCG is under the DOTR. That of course delimits also some of their functions and mandate. Now, we've seen a golden age for the Philippine Navy and Coast Guard so far. And given the context that we are seeing these observations, mean to say that annually we have these unilateral, bilateral, unilateral, multilateral naval exercises conducted by the Philippines with its like-minded allies. And of course, we've seen the French coming into the Philippines. They are investing so far with us. They are trying to help us in our modernization program. Some European navies also are here, like UK recently, yesterday, UK wanted to support us in our maritime laws, and of course our Hague ruling arbitration. And of course, perception-wise, the Philippine Navy naval assets has increased. It is now number 26 out of 140 countries, overtaking Pakistan and UK. And this is something that we wanted that the PCG would also have, given that of course they are the first. The Philippines is the first to have its own Coast Guard in Southeast Asia. We wanted them to have to continue their modernization process. And of course, as explained, which we will do later on, the importance of Quad and AUKUS in the Philippines. And definitely there will be some investments for the submarine for the Philippines, but we'll see how this would really help us in our external defense. And right now there is a debate in the AFP on what would be the fate of the self-reliance defense posture, given that of course there are models like South Korea and Indonesia where they were successful in doing this one. And as of this moment, the AFE is more focused on the capability, material, and technology development, because we have a lot of gaps and insufficient technological requirements that will be needed by the AFP in order for us to attain a more respectable defense posture. And we hope that the Philippine Coastal and Defense Maritime technological requirements will be achieved, given that, of course, one issues would be the budget constraints that we have. That's the reason why we want to rebrand the AFP modernization, including the PCG, that we are using people's money and they have to prove to the Filipino people that they deserve these chances. And of course, the whole of alliance approach, which we wanted to see more of an increased multilateralism coming from our organizations, institutions, particularly from the Philippine government. And we will see later on in the succeeding slides on how we will achieve this one. Now, we know for a fact that given the context that we are seeing a theatrical stage of power hegemony in Southeast Asia, and there's as explained by Professor Manhit, of course, there's a competition between the US and China, and China is anchored in increasing its economic power and military command in the region, which we could understand as of the moment. And as a response to countering US-led dominance in the region. And we have also seen that ASEAN's dual strategy, given that they are aiming for the centrality in geopolitics in Indo-Pacific, while augmenting its ability to endure its own institutional hedging strategy. And we also knew that regional governments like ASEAN cannot help us enough in resolving maritime disputes. But we wanted to have a stronger ASEAN that will help us later on in resolving a lot of disputes in the region. Now, what would be the stance of the Philippines, given that we are a middle power and we have already definitely we have seen that Manila has become a player, given that, of course, the geostrategic importance of the Philippines to major powers. That's the reason why we are calling for a whole of alliance approach. That means that we wanted to have more proactive and increase multilateralism, because we are seeing a multipolar world. And there are models basically when it comes to confidence building mechanism. We've seen the Jakarta and the Hanoi style of dealing with Beijing, while they are talking to Beijing. At the same time, they are building their national security infrastructures. That's the reason why we are doing the same thing, and hopefully it will be continued by the incoming administration. Well, if Philippines become the new hub for the Belt Road Initiative, that is something that we have to look at also. Although, of course, we welcome all investments coming from different major powers, and of course from European Union, the Americans, and so on. So it's not only that we should rely from China. There's also Japan, who has been helping us in many of our infrastructure programs. Now, there's Quad, which was explained already by Professor Mandit. Of course, we wanted to see Quad to have more cooperative mechanisms to improve joint interoperability, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities. And we wanted to create an Indo-Pacific that would be more critical to infrastructure funding scheme. We know for a fact that they laid down their platforms for economic reforms, and hopefully this will be realized by the Quad members and those Quad Plus members. And of course, you have Ocuster. Of course, it talks more of the submarines here, but we wanted to see larger steps to build cooperation with security partners in Asia. Okay, there's a multipolar, the world is changing towards a multipolar, multiplex world, as they say. But how do we deal with the competition between China and the United States? Let's try to do a SWOT analysis given the strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and the threats that we have with these two superpowers. What does the US possess? Of course, it's a maritime power, and it has this Navy superior lift capability that can transport firepower, fuel, food, and cargo to sustain distant combat operations through their shipbuilding capability. It is a ship power. It has this ship power and propulsion that can maximize the power of surface ships, having smart shipping aimed to fully optimize the energy efficiency and the use sensors basically for the speed application of their jet automation, self-calibration, and so on. So that is the strength of the US. And of course, we've seen also some of their frailties, weaknesses of cyber attacks. And some were saying that they have this dwindling maritime infrastructure, deteriorating maritime infrastructure due to pending Shipyard Act in the US Congress, and of course, the pending Jones Act that would help the US to have a more stronger and vibrant maritime industry, still pending as of the moment. And of course, where the US is good at. Of course, they are very good when it comes to projection of maritime power, and of course, we have to look at their models when it comes to multilateral and military groupings, and of course, their support on research and development. We have to invest on this one, given that, of course, we are changing our strategy from internal security operations to territorial external defense, basically, and of course to look at the science, technology, education as part of the cornerstone of the US economy. Now, why the US is threatened? Basically because of China's military modernization effort, and also their China's gray-zone strategy and its anti-access area denial. And of course, we know for a fact that the US has shifted a greater percentage of its fleet to the Pacific, given that, of course, we are seeing a theatrical stage of a hegemonic rivalry in this region. And also some were saying that the US has a shrinking budget when it comes to their naval power and projection. Now, we're talking about China here. It's a revisionist nation, and it has been modernizing its Navy for the past 25 years. It has already surpassed the US Navy in numbers of battle force ships, And we know for a fact that China's naval ships, aircraft, and weapons are far more modern, comparable to Western navies, and it is capable of conducting conventional and nuclear precision strikes. And China is also developing hypersonic light vehicles. Now, why we are watching China? Because basically of its modernization effort that encompasses a wide array of platform and weapon acquisition programs. And we should note that China's Coast Guard is by far the largest of any country in East Asia, and China's Navy now is the #1 Navy in the world in terms of great ships. Now, what are the weaknesses of China basically? It lacks recent combat experience, and they need to focus on increasing total platforms than on increasing the modernity. And I think one of China's weaknesses would be its undersea warfare, amphibious lift, and aerial refueling capabilities. And Chinese capabilities gaps in maritime strike aircraft is considered a low observable aircraft. And China has only one foreign base in Africa compared to US having 800 plus bases worldwide. But of course, let us not underestimate China. Imagine if China has 800 plus bases around the world, then that is some sort of threatening basically. Now, where is the weakness? It lags behind in terms of its nuclear undersea capabilities. China's courier force faces several daring weaknesses, and it has deficiencies. And China does not possess advanced system catapult technology unlike the United States. And they have problems when it comes to cyber attacks that would disrupt its informationized high technology weapons. Now, what can we hope for with China, given that it's the second largest economy? And by projections, some were saying that by 2030 and beyond, China will become the largest economy in the world. China relies primarily on its Coast Guard, and the problem there is that they have enforced their China Coast Guard law last year, and China's Navy operates primarily in China's home waters. That's the reason why some were saying that China is not yet a naval nation, but a territorial power. That's the reason why they kept on reclaiming the South China Sea, because beyond South China Sea, they cannot go out there and display their naval force. Because of course, we have seen some guardians, Western navies, and some Asian naval powers also guarding China. And China's long-distance naval deployments have been doing a lot of diplomatic protocols only, and they have ship hospitals part of their intelligence gathering also. Now, why China is threatened? Because of the US Navy, and we see it as something that there's this maritime militia that contributes to China's coverage strategy, and we will have to see that in succeeding months and years, depending on the temperament and perhaps the kind of relations that Manila and Beijing will have to execute, basically. Now, for my last slide here, this is something that I want to focus on. I'd like to see that if China is a true friend to the Philippines, it has to allow the Marcos administration to help the country's military modernization and strengthen its territorial defense operations. Because a Philippine independent foreign policy needs strong armed forces and Coast Guard to become a maritime power. And the Navy and Coast Guard should maintain its sovereignty patrols on the country's maritime domains, ensuring a surface force to meet the current mission and long-term obligations, including the safeguard of sea control and denial, projecting power, maintaining maritime security, and also performing functions to support mission other than war. The AFP and PCG should improve its human, organizational, and information capital. It has to build a culture of jointness, which I think some ASEAN countries are looking at Manila's model, and establish integrated secure communication and information system to institutionalize integrated joint logistics support system and develop a professional and highly motivated regular and reserve force. Lastly, the AFP and Philippine Coast Guard should focus on territorial defense operations than the internal defense operations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Chester. For everyone, for all our participants, we've had very comprehensive discussion with our first two speakers. So if you have any questions that you want to lodge in, don't forget to put it in the Q&A function that you can see below your screens. Moving forward, we have Admiral Romel Ong. He is the chairperson of the Security Reform Initiative, Inc. He is also a professor of praxis in the Ateneo School of Government. He previously served as a vice commander of the Philippine Navy. Admiral Ong.
Thank you, Clarice. May I request for yung slide share?
Yes. Let me just fix that. Wait.
Thank you, Clarice. During the present administration under President Duterte, I think there was little or no discourse towards developing a coherent maritime strategy. The only bright spots that I can personally look at are both from the Navy and the Marine Corps, which were able to develop service level maritime defense and security strategies, which is both used for capability development planning. Moving forward, the pending change in the administration on June 30th provides an opportunity for a fresh start and a policy reset. Next slide, please. Any aspirations for our archipelagic state to maintain agency over its maritime interests in the near future would require the formulation of a whole of government strategy that would synergize and integrate the country's direction in terms of military diplomacy, its maritime defense and security posture, its plans to harness key components of the blue economy, and enhancing the Filipino full potential as a seagoing race. First off, next slide, please. Our military diplomacy needs to develop interlocking unilateral arrangements and partnerships across the region, which will provide us a 360-degree coverage around our archipelago. Now, specifically, we need to sustain our trilateral arrangement with Indonesia and Malaysia to secure our southern border. And similarly, we might need to develop similar arrangements with US, Australia, and Japan to address security concerns in the north and eastern axis of our archipelago. We need to engage Taiwan to secure our northern borders and protect our OFWs that are working there. Taiwan has been always a strategic blind spot to us, and I think this requires some further attention. We need to advocate for a unilateral arrangement among ASEAN member states for the South China Sea and West Philippine Sea, if we are intent on avoiding being drawn in the middle of a US-China strategic competition in the South China Sea. And lastly, we look at European middle powers such as the United Kingdom and France, which can provide fresh opportunities for strategic partnerships as well. Second, we should start rationalizing the roles of the Navy and the Coast Guard in securing the country's maritime interests. As well as the modernization of the Navy, the Air Force, and the Coast Guard should be pursued under the respective existing programs. Among these are the submarine acquisition program in France, perhaps looking at additional shore-based missile systems coming in from India, and looking at sourcing through the ODA fund of Japan for additional ships for the Navy. In terms of maritime domain awareness, the Philippine Space Agency could collaborate with the Navy in looking at nanosatellite technology for civil military purposes. This could be used to monitor maritime traffic, serve as a communications relay system, and gather scientific data. It can also be linked to the National Coast Watch system and be integrated with the nascent Indo-Pacific Partnership for Maritime Domain Awareness against illegal fishing. Next slide, please. Third, part of our blue economy critical to securing our maritime interests should be included in the National Economic Development Authority's Medium-Term Development Plan and its evolving Ambition 2040 long-term plan. To it, why not use the modernization program of the Navy for technology transfer to develop a globally competitive shipbuilding and repair industry? Government can incentivize the upgrade of local companies and later give them equal opportunities to compete in future bids with the Department of Defense. Subsidizing a refleeting program for domestic cargo and passenger shipping industry to stimulate both local and shipbuilding and shipping industries. Those ships constructed under this program could form part of the country's merchant fleet and the Navy's Naval Reserve Force to undertake transport, logistics, and disaster response. Investing in ports and harbors and other critical infrastructure for dual-use purposes. Example would be the former Hanjin facility in the Subic Bay. Investing in research and development by incentivizing and properly compensating the efforts of the academe and the business industry to participate in the Navy and the Air Force modernization program. Next slide, please. Investing in improving our STEM or our science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education program among our science high schools and engineering colleges that could serve as the incubators of talents which can be absorbed by the defense and industry sector later on. And lastly, next slide, please. Government could take the lead in reforming the maritime manpower industry to become globally competitive and compliant with international standards for seafarers. In summary, next slide, please. A coherent, overarching maritime strategy optimizes opportunities available to a maritime nation, which would allow government to provide a safe space for its economy and its people to thrive in relative peace. That is my presentation. Thank you and good morning.
Thank you, Admiral Ong, for providing an agency-to-agency recommendation and overview. For our last speaker, we have Dr. Renato De Castro. He is the trustee and program convener for the Stratbase ADRi Institute's Defense and Security Program. He is a professor for De La Salle University. He has conducted several courses on IR and security studies and has published multiple articles on the same that have been published in a number of scholarly journals across the globe. Dr. Rene.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you fine.
So first of all, I would like to express my utmost appreciation for ADRi for giving me the chance to present this presentation, which was originally prepared for a conference organized by the Office of Naval Strategy and Strategy Management, and a conference on May 11 this month. But I was not able to present it because of the file got corrupted on the night of my presentation. Now I'll have a chance to present it. And my presentation has to do with looking at what I would consider the source of our effort to develop our Navy, the AFP modernization program, which I would challenge, primarily because of its origin, of its nature. Now let me start my presentation. The effort to build up our maritime capability is, of course, linked with the AFP modernization program, which is, of course, mandated by a Republic Act 100349, which was, of course, passed during the term of the late President Benigno Aquino III. It was an offshoot, of course, of a tense 3-month standoff between Filipino and Chinese civilian vessels off Scarborough Shoal. The law was passed around in December 2012. The standoff happened from April to June 2012. And of course, what happened was there was, of course, an initial agreement for both sides to withdraw. But of course, China did not withdraw. Instead, it took control of Scarborough Shoal, which of course gave impetus, greater impetus to push through with this modernization program, given, of course, the fact that when the incident happened, the Philippine Navy did not have any modern ship. Most of its ships were Second World War vessels, except, of course, the flagship, the BRP Gregorio del Pilar, which was actually a former US Coast Guard cutter. So, ironically, of course, the plan to modernize the AFP happened 17 years before the Scarborough standoff. It began during the time of President Fidel Ramos when Congress passed Republic Act 7898. And of course, what happened was Congress simply did not provide enough funds. The original plan was a 50 billion peso fund, but only Congress only released 5.4 billion. This was, of course, in the mid-1990s. The purpose of Congress, of course, was to micromanage the implementation of the program. The delay in the implementation of the program, of course, led to the fact that it became a victim of several circumstances. Number one, of course, was the Asian financial crisis. Then, of course, in 1998, the Ramos administration decided to refocus again the armed forces of the Philippines towards domestic insurgencies, despite the creation of the Philippine National Police in place, of course, of the defunct Philippine Constabulary. Supposed to be RA 100349 offers a second and more expansive force modernization in terms of the development, not simply of the naval capability of the Navy, but a multi-mission oriented AFP. The two programs were originally conceived in 1995. The country responds to, of course, China's maritime expansion, the South China Sea, through, of course, posturing, financing, efforts to develop military capabilities to address national concern emanating from the country's maritime environment. Given, of course, that the Philippines faces an entirely challenging external environment in the 21st century, enhancing the country's external defense capabilities, primarily the maritime capabilities, becomes more important than ever as the countries try to maximize the utilization of limited funds, identifying proper means of arms acquisition, of course, addressing the underlying factors accounting for the fact that the implementation of the modernization program has been extremely low. So what has long been ignored is the implementation of the long delayed, what has long been ignored in the long delayed implementation program of the AP is to examine and understand the inertia of a legislative based force modernization in contrast to what is called a capability driven force modernization as the basic foundation of building up Philippine maritime capabilities. We're the country that is supposed to be developing our naval capability in face of an external threat, yet the program is actually based on a legislation. So my discussion is supposed to focus on what's the difference between legislative-based versus capability-driven force modernization, but I simply don't have enough time. I'll just have to breeze through what we considered as capability-driven force modernization. Probably just discuss 2 or 3 slides before I go to the meat of my discussion. The AP modernization program is essentially a form of defense planning, which is all about preparation for the security of the polity of our nation, given that such planning is conducted primarily in peacetime and hopefully not during wartime operation, simply because you don't have the time to prepare your forces, to train your men once, of course, push comes to shove, once during the time of war. Defense planning in national polity should be the central concern, ideally, of course, a central concern of decision makers. I don't think this is the case in the Philippines. Of course, given the fact it's highly political for 2 important reasons. Number one, of course, all efforts for modernization is a classic example of what is called guns versus butter dilemma. You will have other projects that could possibly be used, instead of putting your money into what many decision makers here in the Philippines would see as useless. When you talk about acquiring weapons for the armed forces of the Philippines, it could not generate votes. So they rather allocate the money to other projects that, of course, could generate votes, especially during the time of the election. So what's the use, basically, of spending money for the military, which is, of course, a very dangerous assumption. And the obvious fact that the future is neither reliable, known, nor is neither reliable nor knowable means that typically there's a scope of political argument over what the country needs in order to be sufficiently secure, given, of course, you simply don't know what will happen in the future. So given decision makers usually ignore anything about the future, they need to answer the following question regarding what to buy. So these are some key questions, no? So I'll just tackle on what is basically a capability driven force modernization. The key point here is the need to match and, of course, offset the capabilities of the potential opponent. That is, of course, looking at the example of Ukraine versus Russia. The Ukrainians and NATO knew for a fact that they would be overwhelmed by Russia's mechanized and armored capabilities. They don't have the resources. They don't have the money. What they could basically invest would, of course, be anti-tank capabilities, which, of course, proved very effective at the onset of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The other, of course, is a constant need to replace aging equipment. This applies, of course, to modern military forces that, of course, would have to replace their arsenal, from third or fourth or even fifth generation fighters. So that's basically, I will stop my presentation here. I would provide the public this power slide, and you can check what do I basically mean by capability-driven modernization. Now, of course, a clear example of a modernization that is not capability-driven is, of course, the case of the Philippine Modernization Program. So the first legislated attempt to modernize the AFP, of course, was 7898, which was enacted just a few months after the discovery of Chinese forces on Mischief Reef. And it's supposed to be, this was in light of the withdrawal of American forces from their Philippine bases in November 1992. RA 7898 provided a 15-year modernization program, and of course, the primary goal was to develop the Navy. The law, however, enabled Congress to determine the program's objective, funding requirements, and thus it had significant leverage over the implementation of the 15-year modernization program. In my 1998 article on adjusting to the post-basis period, Congress basically made sure that the modernization program is not geared for war fighting. It's supposed to be geared in protecting the environment and providing humanitarian and, of course, risk reduction capabilities. This was, of course, in the light that after the end of the Cold War, there was an assumption, prevailing assumption then, that war has become obsolete in the late 20th century. Despite the Congress passage of the law, the 15-year modernization program, of course, was never implemented. I will not have to go into the details. Of course, it was also affected by other externalities. President Aquino spoke of enhanced security for national defense and put forward the country's claim for territories in the South China Sea through, of course, the capability upgrade of the modernization program. You have, of course, an effort to come out with another modernization law after the original modernization law lapsed in 2011. So despite this determination to boost the AP territorial defense capability, the Aquino administration was constrained by insufficient financial resources. There was, of course, a recognition of the need to modernize the AP, specifically the Philippine Navy and the Philippine Air Force on the one side, but the late President Aquino was very conscious, of course, of the cost of such modernization. Interestingly, as mentioned by Rear Admiral Ong, the Duterte administration put its money where its mouth is, met the Philippine military expectation that it continued to finance the modernization program. I don't have to go into details. He, of course, continued funding the separate budget for the modernization program, which is separate from the annual defense spending. Then, of course, in June 2019, he agreed to bankroll the second phase. I will not have to discuss the details. This is in a core. So what are the consequences of a legislative-based force modernization? Number one, both RA 7898 and 100349 ensure that the allocation of limited resources for additional defense expenditures go through a very complex, legalistic, and tedious legislative process that any force modernization program would not be determined by the external environment, but by the agenda of the Philippine Congress. It has been argued that the modernization program, this is not original from me. This is from the recent published work of Amador, Balajay, and Villanueva, I can't remember, who argued that the modernization program is not really aimed to modernize. It's simply aimed to equalize the defense budget. The modernization program is not actually intended to modernize the AFP, but to simply equalize the distribution of resources to all services, because while the Philippine Army takes a lion's share of the annual defense budget, primarily because of the focus of the AFP on internal security, funds for the modernization are utilized in a way for the Philippine Navy and the Philippine Air Force to simply catch up now with the Army in terms of the use of the annual defense budget. It has also been observed that the strategy-based planning was lacking. This is from one of my interviews with my students in the National Defense College. It lacks strategy in terms of the implementation of the program, as the priority security threats whether are not really linked with the intended capability. What's happening outside is simply ignored by the modernization program. Ideally, the national defense strategy should be the basis for the AFP in crafting the overall modernization program. However, in practice, the measures of AFP modernization fund release by, of course, the Department of Budget and Management, or being shared to the general headquarters, AFP, and their major services as in terms of fair share, thereby preventing them from acquiring major defense equipment. It's just basically to satisfy, the demand to maintain harmony in the armed forces of the Philippines. Not in really in terms of what is needed to build up our maritime capabilities. Despite the stated goals of developing the capabilities of the Philippine Navy and the Philippine Air Force, the allocation of the overall defense spending shows that the priority is still geared on internal security operation, with the Philippine Army absorbing most of the annual defense budget and project under the modernization program because of the historical antecedent, legislative mandate, and of course, organizational clout of the Philippine Army. Again, this is not original for me. This is from the article of Amador et al. Plus, of course, in terms of the horizon, the first horizon still focuses on providing equipment for the Army because of the priority on internal security. Consequently, despite the Philippine Navy's acquisition of a few surface combatants since 2020, the 3 frigates from South Korea, the vast majority of its warship are armed only with deck and machine guns, and their effectiveness against enemy warships or aircraft is still very much limited. While the Navy as a whole faces great challenges in coordinating and sustaining operation far out in the open seas. So what are basically my recommendations? So probably it's time that we shift away from a legislative-based, modernization program to one that is based on capability, one that is operates on the basis of capability-driven force modernization. In the second decade of the 21st century, the clear and present danger is now primarily maritime and territorial in nature. However, the overall defense budget and force modernization efforts are still focused on internal security and the buildup of the Philippine Army. There is a need for a rethinking of force modernization to ensure that the AP, as a tri-service armed force, is well equipped to address long-term external security threats that are still hidden by the fog of peace. And we don't know when this fog of peace will be shattered by, of course, the strong light of war. The goal should be geared to the development of the PN's limited sea denial and power projection capability, enhanced by the development of both the Philippine Air Force and the Philippine Army, as without joint operation and support from Air Force and the Army, the isolated and limited PN capabilities would be significantly constrained. So the goal now is not simply the development of naval capability. The goal is the development of joint capabilities for joint operation in the Philippine archipelagic waters. Now, what are some of my key recommendations? Number one, immediate formulation by the National Security Council under this new administration of a new national security strategy based on the July 12, 2016 arbitral ruling, which the President-elect Ferdinand Marcos recently announced that he would uphold. That, the ruling is something that is there, something that is not a matter of claim, it's a matter of right. So what does it mean? We have to focus on developing our maritime capabilities because the challenge emanates from our maritime domain. And this is something I would argue. Probably it's time for us to do away or repeal Republic Act 100349 because it restricts rather than facilitate the modernization program. Instead, pass a law, or I would settle for a policy guideline that will require the Philippine government to put the annual defense budget at 2% of the gross domestic product. So this could be done. We can discuss the mechanics of how this could be done. When the AFP totally from internal security so that the Philippine military can single-mindedly focus on the development of its territorial defense capabilities with an emphasis on developing its capability to wage an asymmetric warfare. Ukraine's ability to stand up against Russia at the early days of the Russian invasion showed the growing importance of defensive asymmetric capabilities against, of course, a more powerful opponent. Strengthen the Philippine-US alliance by fully implementing the 2014 EDCA and, of course, continuing the dialogue, enhancing Philippine security partnership with other US allies, Japan, Republic of Korea, and that's the last one. Formulate a medium-term policy guidelines that would link the AFP modernization program with the defense policies of the country's formal treaty ally, I'm referring, of course, to the United States, and its security partners such as Japan, Australia, and South Korea, and even India, as this will open the Philippine military to the variety of material and additional benefits, allowing it to develop interoperability. We should not look at the modernization program as simply an autonomous undertaking. It should be conducted in terms of its, our security relations with other countries. And of course, the goal is to develop interoperability with our allies and partners' defense systems and capabilities. I think this is my last slide. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Sir Rene, for that very comprehensive discussion. We will be moving forward to the open forum, and we encourage all the participants to lodge in their questions. We have a few questions in which I will tackle into now. Our first question discusses the have we had any gains in terms of implementing trilateral cooperation with Malaysia and Indonesia for the southern border, which Admiral Ong actually previously discussed. I do agree with this question because in terms of capability, we are closer to our Southeast Asian counterparts. So are there any steps now that the government is taking in terms of strengthening this further beyond the Sulu and Celebes Seas? Or what are your recommendations for the presumptive administration or the Marcos administration in terms of the trilateral cooperation? Anyone from the panel can discuss this, but Admiral Ong, this was specifically addressed to you.
Okay, let me answer that first. No? First off, in 2016, that the attempt to create that trilateral cooperative arrangement in itself was already a success. Okay, because it's very difficult to meet three countries or three coastal states to such an agreement. So that's already a success from my point of view. The challenge is still a work in progress because it's a resource-intensive undertaking. Okay? Beyond signing the terms of reference or the MOA for that, you need to invest resources among the three coastal states to provide for the intelligence requirements, the patrol requirements, and the sustained requirement for interoperability. So that's one. You need to put money into it. Second, coming into the new administration, you need to reinforce that previous arrangement by touching base again with the two other countries. Okay, so part naman yan ng diplomatic overtures in changes in administration is you touch base with your neighbors. Thank you.
Anyone else from the panel who would like to touch on this question? None? I will move on to the next question. We are seeing a good start with Marcos in addressing the West Philippine Sea and the arbitral ruling. However, based on our experience, it doesn't always amount to actual action due to other priorities of the administration. Sometimes because of current events, or sometimes just basically the priority agenda of the administration. Do you see a continuity of this, or do you think the Marcos administration is already gearing itself towards a more externally oriented defense or foreign policy? And what are the immediate actions that you think the Marcos administration could take in order to maintain this course of being more externally oriented? Anyone from the
Can I
panel?
address the question?
Yes, sir.
Okay, number one, at the early part of the campaign, he said he would like to bring back the AFP to internal security role. But then he kind of changed. No, during the interview in that Christian network, he said, I would have to protect Filipino fishermen. If I have to deploy the Coast Guard, then I'll deploy the Navy. Chances are he might follow the footstep of his predecessor, President Duterte, who at the onset of his term, I don't know if anyone remembers this, no? He was against the modernization program of the AFP. He said, what's the use of acquiring FA-50s where when China has hundreds of hundreds of Sukhoi and MiGs, so forth and so on. Later on, of course, when he noticed that the AFP was not very happy with his earlier pronouncement, he went along. Eventually, he announced in front, I think, at Romel, if you remember this, I think in front of the 6th Division, around July, he said, I will continue the modernization program of the AFP. Then by September, we signed the contract with Hyundai Heavy Industries for the acquisition of the frigates. He was all out to this. Chances are he would follow this. And another thing that would probably encourage me to think that he would follow it, he would follow the footsteps of his late father. His late father tried to modernize the AFP around the late 1970s when we acquired Crusaders F-8 fighter planes. The goal then was, of course, to modernize the AFP in the light of the emergence of the Second Cold War. This was late 1970s, 1980, after we signed after the Romulo Murphy exchange of note regarding the linking of the the American access with the bases with U.S. military assistance to the armed forces of the Philippines was of course concluded. So the goal was really then to modernize the AFP as early as 1980, except that around 1984 you have the resurgence of the communist insurgency. So the goal to modernize the AFP was of course suddenly disappeared because the focus then started to focus again on the internal. So I don't know whether this will be a guide for him if he would look at again the armed force of the Philippines in the 21st century. Thank you very much for that question.
Can I answer, Clarice?
Yes, sure, po.
I think during the campaign, there was an incremental shift from the defeatist posture of President Duterte towards a more conventional thinking towards defense. Okay, so maybe that was a policy shift based on his conversation with his advisors. I'll just use the word of Justice Carpio, which is let's wait and see. Tingnan natin kung ano mangyari kasi campaign is campaign. You can say anything, but we'll see after June 30th. But just a caveat, no. Even if let's say President-elect Marcos wants to modernize the AFP, we have to deal with the fact na we have problems in our economy, and that is, I think, the primary thing that we need to solve first. So yung guns and butter, that's true. But in this case, even if I'm a retired military officer, I think we need to address the butter issue first. Kasi that redounds to yung yung interest na ng common Filipinos. Put food on the table. Thank you.
Clarice, can I answer also?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Actually, there are three schools of thought in the AFP right now. One is, of course, to continue with the internal security because of the dwindling insurgency issues, which they think they can end during the term of President-elect Marcos. That has been a prevailing thought. And of course, we should understand that during the time of Marcos Sr., insurgency was very high. And Marcos Jr. might think that this is the time to end it, to halt that insurgency and perhaps domestic terrorism in the country. The second school of thought is that the AFP can do both the internal security at the same time the territorial defense, because they have invested already in the first and second horizons of the AFP modernization. And this is the people's money. We spend that, and they have to prove to the Filipino people that they are worthy of these billions of pesos that they use for the modernization program. And I think that would be the third horizon is another problem because of the scarcity of funds. They are searching for funding for the third horizon, which is focused on the territorial defense. And we'll see what will happen with that. The third one is, of course, in terms of, this is the problem of the Philippines. We have no institutionalization of our strategies. Our army is very army-centric, the AFP, I mean, and they are now shifting to Navy or maritime-centric strategy because the world is changing and because of our China threat problem. And I don't think that if we just put away those first and second horizon investments into the back burner, that would be a big uproar for the Filipino people because we use people's money here. And I don't think that in terms of strategy making and formulation, crafting, and so on, we know for a fact that the problem lies on our external defense. And the continuity of the third horizon should be continued and upheld. So this is something that we have to think about. And of course, for the Marcos administration should focus on also, because a lot of people, a lot of officers from the Philippine Coast Guard and also from the Philippine Armed Forces are looking forward for the third horizon, which is focused on the external defense of the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chester. Um, Moving back to a more foreign policy, foreign relations point of view, we have a question here. What are the mistakes of the Duterte administration that the Marcos Jr. administration must avoid in terms of foreign relations? And I guess we can also touch upon how do we harness strategic partnerships coming from a Duterte administration and now towards a Marcos administration? Also in terms of maritime security, capability development, also in this field. Sir Dindo, I think you could start with the foreign policy lessons learned and moving forward with the Marcos administration.
Thank you, Clarice. I've always liked to look at, where we are, but based on the really our experience, the shock. I remember that of September 2016, the so-called independent foreign policy, which was simply a pivot to our greatest security threat, which was China. But of course, I gave it the benefit of the doubt, whereby we saw some statements coming from the office of the president, 26 billion investments. Now, fast forward to where we are. It's June, or it's May 31 exactly. And where are these investments? It never materialized. And our economy moved forward without these investments. But what did we lose? We lose the opportunity to harness our international political capital among countries with shared values, with those who believe on a rule-based international system. But suddenly, this issue of nations among maritime ASEAN with China, suddenly it had a legal precedence. And that's an arbitral victory. It defines, from a point of view of international law, what is ours, also define what does not exist, which is a 9-9. So I just hope we learn from all this. And part of that also is, let's not get drawn into that argument that we are stuck between a choice of China and the United States. That's why in the paper that I co-authored or authored with some of our research team, we spoke of the reality that we live in a multipolar and interconnected world. how we can generate and protect Philippine national interest by looking at how we can assert our rights, protect our territorial or ensure our territorial integrity, and side by side, really generate through economic diplomacy broader sources of investments that might create jobs. So we need to learn from those lessons. This is not an agenda building from my point of view as an author, as a researcher, but simply reflecting and addressing what the people want side by side with the realities beyond our borders. And let's move forward. And hopefully, the incoming government hears not us alone, but the people itself. I as a student of political communication, if I wear that hat, we saw how they have valued the strength of listening to public sentiments and creating a strong campaign, even positioning themselves as strong advocates against China in some of their political communication to the voters. So I'm just hoping from there we can go to the next level of actual policies, both security and foreign policy, to protect our own interests as a nation and to protect the Filipino people's concerns and address it moving forward beyond June 30 when they're inaugurated.
Thank you, Sir Dindo. Anyone else from the panel who would like
Yes,
to?
yes.
Sir
Okay.
Rene.
Of course, it will take another webinar to discuss what assessing the 6 years of the foreign policy of the Duterte administration. But let me just focus on one very minor element that we already see a contrast. No, now this is in terms of what we call foreign policy pronouncements. Now, foreign policy has two dimensions: the formal, of course, what you announce, and what you actually do in terms of decision and deeds as you conduct the affairs of the country. The Duterte administration never came out with any formal foreign policy pronouncement, except a very vague notion of independent foreign policy, which has been used to cover almost everything. So there's no formal foreign policy pronouncement. In contrast, just last week, President-elect Ferdinand Marcos came out with a foreign policy pronouncement. With the interviews of Net 25, remember this? So he mentioned there, I think it's about 2 or 3 paragraphs. Number one, the basic principles of independence, classical assertion of what I call Westphalian sovereignty, then elements regarding China, then the importance of our relationship with the United States, then ASEAN, so forth and so on. So one thing is clear, this incoming administration knows how to conduct foreign policy properly by coming out with foreign policy pronouncement. And I guess he's taking again a page from his father's book. Now, going back to the the 70s and up to the 80s, his father made it a point to come out with formal foreign policy pronouncements. When we open up our diplomatic relations with the socialist countries, with the fall of South Vietnam in 1975, then around 1979, when he said the international system was changing because of the emergence of the new Cold War, so forth and so on. So I guess he's, just like, one thing that really inspired him to run, and something that will inspire him once he steps into, the presidency as our 17th president, will be how his father managed foreign policy in the 1970s and and even, of course, in the 1960s.
Sir Rene. Moving forward, I do have a question here, which I sort of added to as well. We see like latest developments with China having a Pacific plan and having planned exercises in the South China Sea. What does this mean for the region and, of course, for the Philippines in the strategic, tactical, and policy level? Also, if we pivot a bit more away from politics and security, it also has an impact on blue economy, or at least the potential of the economic gains in that region or in that area of the region. So are there ways that we could use the arbitral ruling further to secure our territorial right over in the South China Sea? But also, what are the other, again, strategic, tactical, and policy approaches that we could take in order to not have a repeat of the South China Sea militarization and the buildup that they did there, which effectively gave them control over the seas. Anyone from the panel can answer this.
Clarissa, let me take a crack at it. No?
Sure, sir.
Uh, first off, no, we should understand what are the things we can control and what are the things we cannot control. So one thing we cannot control is how China would posture in the West Philippine Sea or the South China Sea. That is a manifestation of its own interpretation of how it should act on its own core interests. So sa atin naman sa Pilipinas, we need to strategize how we will protect our own maritime interests. Okay. So just as I presented earlier, we need a whole of government way of looking at maritime strategy. So it means interconnectedness between our foreign policy, our military diplomacy, the modernization programs for all the services, including the Coast Guard, needs to be harmonized. More so now because meron tayong limited fiscal space. We need to spend wisely, not spend. And this will be a function of how much money we have available for us. Kaya nga limited fiscal space. And of course, we need to look at yung, Dr. Rene mentioned it earlier, we tend to think in stovepipe. We stovepipe our way at looking at defense and security, and we stovepipe the way we look at the economy. But they are connected. And yung the way, if we look at it from a perspective of blue economy, it's all interconnected. We need to protect our blue economy, and the one way of doing that is to have a maritime and defense security posture that secures that economy. Okay. So yun yung ano dun eh. We need to break the stovepipes, and it's both institutional and mindset that we need to break. And me as a former retired military, ang frustration namin is we never really got that kumbaga space in the NEDA's medium-term development plan. Kumbaga, we are an afterthought. The security sector is an afterthought because sabi nga ni Dr. Rene, we are looked as a cost. Kasi public good is always looked as a cost rather than as a way of investing in the country. So we need to look at the defense and security also as an investment, not just a money going out. Ilan, thank you.
Yes, can I butt in? Yeah, I support Romel. In fact, if you look at China's maritime expansion, it's also linked with China's economic interests. The People's Liberation Army's Navy was able to convince the Chinese leadership that if China would like to avail of the blue economy, it would have to have control of the waters within the 9-dash line. So there's a link. There's actually a link in terms of force modernization and of course the economic development, especially in the case of the Philippines. We should always remember we are an archipelagic nation. And the resources we have in our archipelagic waters, we could only tap them if we secure them. So investment, we have to look at, money going into the modernization program as investment. If we want to protect and harness those resources, natural gas, oil, and of course fish, we have to invest money to protect them, or else China would take, would basically take control and exploit them right at our very eyes. So at this point in time, again, as Romel mentioned, the funds for the modernization program should not be seen in this strict dichotomy of guns versus butter. It's also a matter of investment. If we want to develop our blue economy, then we have to invest on our maritime capabilities.
Yeah, Clarice, may I add also, we should remember the ceilings of communications. China saw it as a robust way of engaging with the world, and we saw the traffic there. That's the reason why they're trying also to replicate as a student of this world order. Sorry for the noise from my neighbor. But nonetheless, of course, economics and politics are of course interrelated, and we should welcome investments also from China, but at the same time, let's not compromise our national security. I think that's a lesson that we've learned so much. Though. And I think from the previous question, the problem that we had in the incumbent administration is the lack of unified narrative, which we wanted to see for the incoming administration to have that unified narrative, given that we had an arbitration ruling in favor of the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir Dindo, do you have any comments on the question regarding
I'm
Chinese
good.
expansion?
Uh,
All right,
I,
sir.
they have covered it. Our colleagues have covered it all. You know where I
Yes.
stand. You know where our institute stand on this China's expansion. With the threat, the greatest threat to Philippine national security.
All right, I'll go down to last two questions. One from the Q&A. Regarding self-reliance on our military assets, we always say that we want this to materialize, but up to this time, we do not have a concrete plan. How can we walk the talk with the SRDP, which I think Sir Dr. Chester touched on in his discussion. Anyone from the panel also can dive deeper on this.
Can I'll take a crack at it.
Go ahead,
Yes.
Admiral
sir.
Ong.
Sige, Dr. Chester, ikaw muna.
Go ahead, sir. Go ahead, sir.
First of all, we need to look at the legal framework of SRDP kasi may problem doon. And it also connects with the way the revised AFP modernization program, the legal part of it, was framed or constructed. Kasi it's biased towards foreign companies coming in. Okay, and that's why in my presentation I was looking at how do we reinvigorate yung local industry natin so that they become active partners in our defense industry. Right now, the law is biased against that, and we need to fix the law first. Okay, so that they will have equal the opportunity. Pangalawa, they cannot do it on their own, and we need to find ways for them to be recipients of technology as well. That's why I was advocating when we do the modernization program at least for the Navy, dapat may transfer of technology component niya. Not the Navy as the recipient, but private sector partner. So that we want private sector to be involved in defense industry as well. Okay, so spread the wealth, kumbaga. Kasi the armed forces is not supposed to be a wealth creator.
Yes.
It's supposed to be a service provider, but we need private sector to be active participant in the business side of the industry. Kumbaga. Yeah, thank you.
If I may add also, we have a weak research and development in the Philippines when it comes to national security also. That's the reason why we have a government arsenal that focuses only in the production of bullets and small arms. Imagine if in the past, way back, we have developed an industry that focuses on missiles. Although during the time of Marcos Sr., we have the Bongbong missile, but it didn't materialize. And now we have BrahMos missiles where we imported from India. So imagine if we have developed that kind of research and development, maybe we could have done so much, and perhaps we can have our own a true self-reliant defense posture. Thank you.
Clarice,
Thank you. I'll go, sir.
We need to invest also in research and development. Kasi as of now, the construct of transactions is thank you lang yung R&D. And the one bearing the cost is the private sector. So dapat iba yung production, iba yung research and development. It's a two-stage process. And if we do not invest in research and development, kaya pa tayong STEM education natin because our scientists are going abroad because they don't have anything to do here. Okay, so STEM education is affected. Pangalawa, business, academe, which have R&D components by itself, hindi siya nagpo-flourish because, again, no investment. So those are also things to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral.
Sorry.
Okay. Who wants
I
to
just
go?
wanted to support the the arguments ni Admiral Romel because I've been an advocate of how you can harness the private sector. As somebody who has taught governance for 26 years, it's the whole idea that there are things that government can do, but there are also how we can harness the private sector to deliver things for us. And that's a nice, very strong point that we should look at, and a different mindset that we need our policymakers to consider.
Dr. Chester, you were going to say something then po.
And also, we have to consider the recruitment of the Coast Guard and also the armed forces. No? Now they are more of a generalist. They are recruiting personnel from different fields like cybersecurity specialists, biologists, chemists. We need those because if you really wanted to have a multi-role AFP and PCG, you have really to become more inclusive. And secondly, I think the problem also is on the budget. That's the reason why we have to rebrand the AFP modernization program as an investment, as a public investment, and also as a national pride, because ultimately we are using people's money here. So those are my takeaway about that. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. And I do agree with all your points. If we look at other models of other states when it comes to modernization program, a lot of it actually doesn't come with just buying assets, but really heavily investing in research and development so that they could be capable themselves. Just to end, however, because we are almost close to the end of the event, I have one last question for the panel and anyone can answer. What can we expect from the first 100 days of the Marcos administration, given the many interviews that he's had, other pronouncements that he's made on foreign and security policy, and anything more specific on the maritime space? Anyone can answer.
Okay, first he will have to assign a Secretary of National Defense, then of course a National Security Advisor who would have to basically tell him, you know, we continue the modernization program that of course did not begin with the previous administration, but began with the Aquino administration, 2012. President Duterte continued because of the fact that he wanted also the support of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. And I guess all presidents would like to have the goodwill of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. He could not simply reverse, you know, the modernization program. We have already acquired, for example, we have already acquired frigates from South Korea. You need to develop, you know, they have already a port and Hanjin in Subic. So you have to acquire other weapons. You cannot just mothball them. They already acquired them. So I think this is the reality we'd have to face. Of course, he would have to support it. And more importantly, of course, not just support it, he would have to, of course, always engage Congress in this tug of war. You know, President Duterte was able to finance at least this 25 billion peso a year rolling out, you know, for the modernization program. He succeeded. The late President Aquino did not. For one reason or the other, he was not able to come out with the annual full amount of 25 billion. So this will be a challenge for him to decide. And once, of course, he decides to continue to modernize the Armed Forces of the Philippines, then again, he will have to, as you know, as even what happened in the case of his late father, the president is usually the defender of the interests of the Philippine military. That has always been the case in our political system, starting with President Quezon, starting, of course, with, you know, up to the time of his late father. He would have to assume that role. He could either pursue it vigorously or just go along with the flow. Only time will tell what will be his stake regarding this. Okay, thank you.
Sir, I'll go first. Ikaw ang last, sir.
Sige.
Because you're,
Go
for me, it's like this. We cannot afford to have an independent foreign policy if we don't invest on the territorial defense operations of the Philippines, because everything is unpredictable. When we talk about security, there's this VUCA perspective where everything is unpredictable and ambiguous there. We do not know what are the plans of China, although we have some angles on how to look at their vision. But in terms of the relations with us, it's very volatile. in terms of our political security relations with them, which has become a hindrance to have a robust Manila-Beijing relations. But of course, while having this diplomatic and economic rapprochement with China, we should also continue with the national security infrastructure of the Philippines. That's the reason why I have some apprehensions if the incoming administration will focus on the internal security, which I think is also needed because of our insurgency issue, which is already very little to steps to crush and halt it. We have told to the Filipino people that I think modernization is a good investment, but if we will just focus on the internal security, then that would be a big problem, and I think it has to be explained to the Filipino people. So I'll put it that way. Thank you.
I'll go na. Thank you. So first one, we need to get out of that rut of the internal security versus external defense paradigm. For one, as early as 2016, there were only 4,000 plus armed regulars remaining. And that was even before the President Duterte came into power. So basically, it was already contained in 2016. And given the recent successes of the AFP on the ground, in terms of surrender and neutralization, more so, less na yung, we're talking of lesser number. So as early as 2016, we were already shifting not to security, but looking at underdevelopment and misgovernance as drivers of insurgency, meaning we were already looking beyond the armed component of the problem. And when we talk of underdevelopment and misgovernance, that already way beyond the capabilities and mandate of the AFP. So to me, the ISO problem is contrived and it can be easily dealt with. Okay? There are underlying reasons why it was hyped up, but this is not the venue for that. That can be explained further. Second, on the independent foreign policy, it is in the Constitution and it's nice to hear, but it's very expensive. Because independent foreign policy means you pay for everything and you develop for everything. Okay, I am more for you looking at interlocking relationship with our neighbors and our alliance and our partners, and this requires a slight shift away from this strict independent foreign policy posture. That's why we need to work with our alliances, our partners, either in a multilateral or minilateral arrangements, to help us, because there is convergence of interest in terms of the maritime space. Okay? And there are always opportunities for cooperation with other countries. Having said that, I think, thank you.
Thank you, Admiral Ong. Sir Lindo, any perspective on the first 100 days of Marcos in terms of foreign policy and security
Very
policy?
important that as he appoints the foreign policy team, that as I've said earlier, we need a clear, cohesive, and consistent foreign policy direction. Of course, that will emanate from the views of the president himself, as head of state, as head of government. But that's why I kept on using the word responsive. Right? It needs to understand and learn from public sentiment that consistently, is nearly 6 years, there is that desire from the Filipino public that we need to uphold our national sovereignty and our territorial integrity. And also responsive in the sense that how can we really turn our diplomatic mission, generate more investments, more trade opportunities, to really uplift the lives of the Filipino people. We have seen this generational inequality of lack of economic opportunity, maybe through a more open economy that can create investment both from domestic and foreign investment. Our foreign policy initiatives can help create those opportunities for jobs that would provide better income for Filipinos, and that's not, so we don't need to send them outside, or we should limit the people that goes out and keep them here with their families. So very basic things is what I look at, but one that is responsive, but that is also one that is beyond politics, one that is more strategic, as have been articulated by our top thinkers in our panel today. Admiral Romel Ong, Dr. Renato De Castro, Dr. Chester Cabasa. Thank you, Clarice.
Thank you, Sir Dindo. Thank you, Sir Rene, Admiral Ong, and Dr. Chester. We will now be closing the event officially with our Executive Director for Stratbase ADRi Institute, Sir Paco Pangalangan. Sir Paco.
Thanks, Jackie. Coming in clear, I hope. So
Just a bit louder, pa, sir.
a bit louder. Let me see if I can make it.
There, sir. That's
Okay.
better. That's
that's
better.
louder.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So thank you, Jackie. First and foremost, I'd like to express my appreciation to our speakers, Stratbase Group President Linda Manhit, our convener, Professor Renato De Castro, Rear Admiral Romel Ong, and Dr. Chester Cabasa for their valuable contribution to our virtual town hall discussion on the future of Philippine foreign policy, on maritime security capability and strategy. My deepest gratitude also goes out to all who attended today, both on Zoom and Facebook, and helped make this event the success that it is. Our security program, of which this event is part of, remains to be one of the most active of the Stratbase ADRi Institute. After all, security remains a major issue in our region. The inherent multipolarity of the Indo-Pacific has produced complex security challenges that continue to underscore the importance of multilateral and inclusive cooperation among states. In the context of the Philippines, the tensions in the West Philippine Sea have become more than just an issue of national security and territorial integrity. Security concerns in the disputed waters affect not only the country's maritime marine resources, but also the safety and livelihood of Philippine fishermen. As a result, the West Philippine Sea has become a top-of-mind issue for many Filipinos, and as discussed, this is reflected in the Institute's own studies. Strengthening the cooperation and coordination among civil maritime agencies and institutions is crucial in developing the country's capacity to protect its maritime zones and effectively respond to emerging security concerns. During today's discussion, we heard from our speakers some of their policy recommendations and inputs on how we can do just that. These included the need for a more responsive and strategic, independent, and values-based Philippine foreign policy, the increased multilateralism with the aim of becoming a maritime power, shifting from logistic-based to capability-based modernization, and of course, the need for a whole-of-government strategy for the Philippines. With the May 22 elections now behind us, the new government now has a renewed opportunity to consider such recommendations and reassess how the Philippines can best address its strategic and maritime interests, particularly in the West Philippine Sea. It is also a chance for the Philippines to analyze how its foreign and security policy can promote peace and stability in the maritime commons. In a recent interview, and this has been mentioned throughout our discussion today, President-elect Bongbong Marcos Jr. said that he would not allow a single millimeter of our maritime coastal rights to be trampled upon. It is his strongest statement yet on this issue. It is our hope at the Institute that the new government follows through, and in the words of our Institute President, Linda Manhit, that the new government continues to listen to the Filipino people on key issues. Lastly, it is our hope that through today's virtual event and the Institute's related publications mentioned today, such as the Beyond the Crisis book, that we are able to contribute to the public and national discourse on the need to uphold the country's maritime interests. Now, before ending my closing remarks, I would like to again convey a special thanks to today's speakers for their concise and insightful sharing of ideas, and our participants for joining us today. Finally, my deepest thanks goes out to the think tanks programs and defense and security teams for running such a smooth event. Again, thank you all and have a good day.
Thank you, Paco.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone. Admiral
Thank you,
Romel,
everyone.
Chester, Rina. Thank you. Thank you to all the participants. Thank you.
Thank you.